Hey, welcome everybody I think this is episode 5 of the Three Amigos Isolation Podcast. We have a special guest with us this evening. Her name is Agnes Chen. She's a mother of 3 and a registered nurse who inspires others to co-create a community that is for every child and every adult who was ever once a child. By growing an empathetic understanding of adverse childhood experiences. Agnes grew up in a home where addiction and mental illness existed, and she became all too familiar with the stigma of mental illness and the negative impact of adverse childhood experiences. Fortunately, she also grew grateful knowing the power and need for relationships in buffering childhood adversity, thanks to the many individuals who supported and saw the value in her as a child. By sharing the science and statistics behind ACEs, as well as her own story of resilience, she hopes to inspire us to refocus on the potential that each child has and connect on our shared need for secure attachments and relationships to grow with resilience. So welcome, Agnes, and we have you with us for the next hour. And
lucky you.
I don't know, John. Yeah, I would say lucky us.
She's very lucky. Oh yeah, lucky us. I just want to point out that Agnes is our first female guest. Woo. And power to Agnes.
I wish I knew how to play an instrument, though. I'm sorry that I don't.
You know what? I think your life is your instrument. Your life is your testament. You know, you. I've seen you work. I've seen you in your element, and I think, honestly, you're very graceful in the things that you do and the projects that you take on. So I think, like an instrument, you know, I think that's how it is. That's your life. You're constantly playing. Right?
That's very well put.
Well, Agnes, let's do a little, if you're willing, let's start this with a little demonstration of how, of the instrument you can play. So you can see me, I can see you.
Yep.
Hold your hands up like this.
Oh.
Okay, so clap in time with me.
You just want me to keep going?
There. You can play an instrument. You have time.
Perfect. I will say we do have a music room though. My husband and my kids are like, we have drums, we have ukuleles and mandolins and harps.
Harp.
Play, but
oh my gosh.
Who plays the harp?
You know what? I think it's like a kid's harp. So I have an 8-year-old who loves music. And it's cute. We have a video of him at 6 months old, literally attacking my husband while he was playing a guitar. So we kind of went with that. He likes it and all the other kids like it. So we have a music room. So on our main floor, we have a full-on adult drum set.
Do you have
music?
Do you have all the musical instruments like on display so that your kids can just kind of have a go for it? Oh yeah.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. So we have, we're pretty lucky, and they're super lucky. But now my husband and I are both working from home, so it's like, don't go in that space.
Because you can't handle the noise, or is it?
We're all on Zoom meetings or talking to clients and patients, and so it's a no zone while we're working. But
that's fair. That's hard. That must be hard.
Yeah. Well, I think it's hard for them, but it's been I like everybody adjusting with what is this with the pandemic in front of us. So,
you know, I know that you're a pretty incredible person, and you have a really good perspective on life, and you're positive. But we can also be real here, because sometimes it's pretty shitty. It's really tough. It's been really tough. This week's been better for our family at home.
Oh, good.
But man, just like having all these things going on at the same time, it can be challenging, and so I commend you. And so you got 3 at home.
Yep.
And 1 more on the go.
Yeah. July.
Is that public knowledge? Because it is now.
I did an online conference, and my friends being like, "You're pregnant?" I was like, "Oh yeah, So I'm like 7 months. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it is public knowledge now.
Okay. Yeah. You're past that.
Oh wait,
Whatever.
yeah. No, it's not.
I was gonna say that would be a circles of rhythm first, like
Yeah.
the nights in a pregnancy on a podcast.
It's funny though, and I know, Julian, when you ask, how things are going, and I, there's a lot of good pieces of it, but to me, I think for me, I really there are people who take on a lot or have really expectations, and I shut down, and I'm kind of like, we're not doing anything. So I have it's kind of my way, I guess, of coping. It's like, no, we're not, like, we're hardly doing school, to be honest. Like it's kind of one of those things that we have had to say, we can only take on this much, and that's kind of probably how we're coping with it, because it's hard to everything with kids at home and school and then work and then so
There's a lot, and I think you're absolutely right. We're kind of at our max. Hey, it feels like that, anyways. Probably we could take on a little bit more, but I also think that maybe the education system is starting to kind of feel out how much people can actually handle, and it really varies. You have conversations with some parents, and they say, oh yeah, it's been a breeze, it's been really easy, my kids have hardly no work at school. And then you talk to some other parents and they're like, I don't even know what's going on, my kids are like running around destroying the house, and I'm trying to do homework and laundry and cook and all the other things that are going on. And work from home, that's a tough thing. I'm lucky that I'm still working, but I can go in the office. And John, you were saying that you're going to be working from home soon, so how are you planning on handling that?
This is my makeshift office so far. I'm finding that I'm doing a lot of Zoom calls with the adolescents I'm working with. So it's 2 days ago I was playing Scrabble. The day before that I was doing a workout with the kid, like it was like 1-to-1. I did guitar lessons. So I'm actually working from home next week for a few days. So we'll see how that is. So I'm fully anticipating the kids to pop their head around the door during the during the day. But
I meant to ask you though, like, sorry, I'm cutting you off, but I meant to ask you, like, I guess number one, those are all your medals, and those are also the numbers from every time you went in jail. Is that what it's from?
Julian, yes, it is. I've got my two loves aside from my family right behind me. It's music and running. So I've got all I keep all my medals. A lot of people don't keep their medals, but I like to keep them and show them off to people, and so I like to be reminded of, people like to be reminded of their own achievements, right? So it's nice.
Are they rugby medals too?
That's not including the rugby medals, mate. That's just the running medals.
Wow.
Yeah. So So working from home next week and trying to turn this makeshift basement into, I'm not going to show you the other side of the camera. It's just a dump. But how are you, Agnes? How are you adjusting? Because I'm assuming that you weren't working from home before COVID-19 happened, and we're just kind of being real, because it's here. And it's, it sucks, but it's also a blessing in disguise, because we get to spend some quality time with our families. And how are you adjusting with the whole working at home, being a mum, Zoom calls?
Totally, yeah. I realized I could never be somebody who works from home. I like getting out. I like seeing people's like facial expressions and their body, how, I read people better when I'm in front of somebody and I can tell how they're feeling. I'm a nurse, so that's, I keep telling people I didn't become a nurse to be on the computer all day. I'm finding that really challenging, definitely. And having, I'm doing more kind of telephone triage stuff. So clients calling in, me calling them. And so that's a bit trickier, because how you talked about, kids come running in or screaming, they're, hitting each other in the backyard, and so you kind of got to pause things. So it's hard to stay. I think that's the most challenging thing. It's hard to stay focused on one thing because you're constantly juggling 5 other things while at home. I find that to be the biggest challenge for me.
Yeah.
And
How are
mentally
you?
exhausted at the end of the day from that.
I was just going to ask you the same, that very thing you were talking about, because obviously with working at home and especially for all of us at the moment, even if you work in, at your chosen location or chosen site, having to deal with the daily duties, your job requirements, and coming home, all the stress with COVID-19 and the news and all that. And I feel that, especially the last few weeks, looking after your own mental health, and this podcast, we do talk about music, we do talk about mental health, and we're very, very open about it. And I think now, especially with everything going on, I think it's okay to have those conversations. So how are you finding, if anything, how are you finding that balance with work, your own self-care? Like, is there anything you're doing at the moment to take care of that?
Yeah, for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's kind of being really mindful, but I'm so used to reading the news before bed or reading the news when I wake up in the morning. So I'm human, so I screw that up sometimes, but I know that disrupts my sleep, and my mind does not shut off. Or I listen to podcasts as I'm getting ready in the morning, and it's kind of reminding myself to have those quieter moments where my brain doesn't have to keep listening or thinking to the things around me. So definitely I'd say that's probably a big one. And really just not having a lot of expectation, knowing I want to get outside. I'm going crazy being inside all day. So I know my kids are feeling that same thing. So it's sort of really low expectations of everybody right now. But definitely that evening routine of not being on my phone, not reading the news, not looking up how many more cases we had today or where they were. So just shutting down and actually like having mentally some quiet time before going to bed.
We have a lot of parents watching this poddy, and I had a few conversations with parents this week on the street at home. Every single parent is doing something different to keep their kids sane. What are you doing to keep your kids sane aside from school and all that fun stuff?
We have a tiny backyard, and I somehow convinced my husband, we're lucky, and we got a trampoline like 2 days before they sold out and stopped. So
Yay!
that are ridiculous. We never thought we'd have one. So they're in the honeymoon phase of having something to jump on. Well, we were kind of like, how are we going to, there's so many times they can go around the block. You can't go to any of the parks anymore. Every time we try to go to, Fish Creek Park or anywhere, it's just, there's so many people. So we're like, how do we get these kids to be active?
Yeah.
So definitely that.
We even talked.
Lego.
Oh yeah, Lego. We even talked about getting a big inflatable to put in the basement.
Totally.
But then the sun came out this week, so
Yeah.
It's
So,
tough, hey?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say the trampoline has been good, and it's not something that we would have thought we'd ever get, but there's that.
Yeah.
So Agnes, I'm wanting to ask you about your nursing.
Yeah.
What area of nursing do you work?
So I work for a not-for-profit in Calgary. It's called CUPS, and so we work with sort of vulnerable communities. We use that word a lot, but it's people who are struggling with mental illness, addictions. Many who are experiencing homelessness, who are struggling with financial insecurity, food insecurity. So a little bit of everything. So I work in the primary care clinic. So kind of your typical, doctor's office. We just have the luxury of spending a little bit more time with our clients and getting into a bit deeper of conversations while they're there to get, wounds cleaned out and whatnot, which is nice.
How have you noticed this pandemic has affected the population that you work with?
Yeah, I mean, they've kind of relegated me to home since I'm pregnant, and I have a really good team there, but it's really tricky because our services are cut down quite a bit. So obviously, we're not working at capacity. We're not providing the same services that we usually would in terms of, even mental health supports, counselors being, like I said, and I mean, John, it's probably similar for you in terms of the youth that you work with. It's not the same. It's still a great way to connect when you're doing things over the phone or over a computer, but you're not getting that, that true connection of being with somebody. So yeah, I'm getting lots of phone calls, right? People who are really just reaching out to connect, 'cause that's their community, right? They come in, a lot of them come in, to grab a bagged lunch and just have a quick conversation. And we've kind of lost that sense, right? And with mental health, you're already so isolated when you're struggling. And so having to be forced to isolate and then told that, you're not alone in this it's nice sentiments, but at the same time, it's people really are alone and they're struggling. So
when you were training, doing your RN, was your goal to work in mental health?
That's a good question. So I'm going to say no. So I grew up in a home where there was mental illness and addiction, and I really did separate the two, to be honest. I became a nurse because it was something that I knew I could finish school and I can move out. I could get paid. There was a job. It was my ticket out. I loved people. I loved health. And so it was kind of my way to just get that ball rolling. And then, it was probably when I moved to Calgary about 10 years ago, I was working at the Rocky View in their intensive care unit. And it was funny because I'd already been working as a nurse at that point for about 5 years. And I had this internal struggle of, people just weren't seeing, the emotional aspect of being vulnerable when you're in a hospital, you're sick or you're diagnosed with cancer. And I always understood, like, there's obviously something bigger, like, yeah, not everybody can just, you tell someone to quit smoking or stop drinking, and then that's stress, so they do it more. And then you hear all these comments about, like, well, what are you doing? So when I moved to Calgary 10 years ago, I had a client or a patient who was diagnosed with cancer. He was homeless. He had been diagnosed with cancer. So when we woke him up, he was unconscious initially. And then when we woke him up, we had a conversation saying, let's reach out to your family. There's a lot going on. And he kind of said, I don't have family. They don't want to talk to me. And he kept putting it down. I was his nurse, luckily, for a few days. So I really got to have that conversation saying, it would be really nice to reach out to somebody. He said, you know what? I have nobody. I'm at the drop-in center, but there's a really great doctor. Please call her and let her know I'm here. I'm okay. And I called, and she was just like, oh my gosh, we were worried about him. We had no idea. Thank you for calling. And so then I went and worked at the drop-in center for a little bit. And it was sort of one of these things that initially, to be honest, it was a big trigger for me because I didn't know how to, I just think it felt very helpless for me initially into that field, because I saw a lot of people who I know weren't getting the support they needed. It reminded me of a lot of people that I was, living with growing up, who we just were never getting that support we need, that emotional support that you need, where you're not feeling understood, right? So it was definitely challenging. But after that, it was kind of one of those things where that fire burns inside of you of, okay, something has to change. We're not having the right conversations in the right circles. We're siloing everything. Mental health is way over here, and our physical health is here. And only some people are privileged enough to access the supports they need to support their mental health. So it was, how do we juggle these two things and bring the conversations together, which is still a challenge. I'm sure we all know that, I think.
Do you think having a childhood history of mental illness and addiction, do you think that had an impact on your development of that altruistic mindset?
So I'll say yes, for sure. I thank you for using that word. That's a very nice compliment. So I initially want to say no, but I think definitely, because I think that, at the heart of it, to be honest, my mental health is not doing so good a few years ago. And it was kind of that, where you think, oh, when I'm older, it'll be better. And then you get older, you realize, what is going on? What are these thoughts? Why do I have no control? My life looks like this now. I really worked hard to get to this place, but I feel like I'm losing control really, really quickly. But what it did do, even when I didn't understand what was going inside of me, there was always this, there's such an injustice in the world. Why are people not understanding other people's stories? Why aren't we listening? We keep saying, be vulnerable. it drove me nuts, because I was like, people are being vulnerable every single day. Like, we're seeing people who are coming in overdosing. That's, if there isn't vulnerability bigger than that, I don't know what. We have, our, the state of mental health in our youth is huge. And we're asking, we're starting this trend, which is really great. We need to be vulnerable, but I'm in a place now where I can be openly vulnerable on a platform, because I have kind of gone through, I have been supported, to be honest, through my mental health journey. But there are people being vulnerable in front of us, and I kept feeling we're not listening, we're not supporting, what they're trying to tell us, and people just want to be understood within their experiences. So,
Brene Brown and her writing on the power of vulnerability. Sometimes I think that just the public or the layperson talking about vulnerability, it almost seems like a buzzword without really understanding what it means to be vulnerable, and wherein that power truly lies when you become vulnerable.
Yeah.
What do you think?
So that's I might make some enemies by saying this. That you bringing that up. So, I remember, and I love Brene Brown. I love what she's bringing. I love that we're talking more about being vulnerable and talking about mental health. And the thing is, I do think that there is vulnerability present in front of us every single day. And I mean, I work in a place where people are vulnerable nonstop, but we forget that vulnerability is being really angry and not being heard. And vulnerability is our kids crying, and us not, sitting there to really listen to those emotions. And this is my perspective, but I do feel that vulnerability is so prevalent. And sometimes I think that we need to shift the conversation a little bit about, how do we handle somebody's vulnerability? How do we stay present? How do we create space to hold them when someone's being vulnerable? Because, there's a lot of self-help books that say, get rid of negative people in your life. And I definitely think we need boundaries, and we need to be better at using our voice and saying, I don't agree. This is really hard for me. I can't help you. But that's somebody being vulnerable too. And I think we just forget about that. And working in, in an environment where people are struggling with mental health, to say, just think positive and be vulnerable, be more vulnerable. I don't, it's smack in the face, to be honest.
Does it ever strike you? Well, it does me. Maybe I'll own that. When I hear the term, when I hear that those buzzwords or that phrase, the power of vulnerability, sometimes it seems like she's really speaking to a privileged group of people, because the disadvantaged in society, they're vulnerable all the time. But when she's really speaking to a privileged, and sometimes it seems, and so this isn't a criticism of Brene Brown, because I love the work she does, but it's sometimes, and feel free to disagree with me on this, it seems a little pretentious.
Oh, Al, I just love everything you just said. I do, and I agree, and we'll be good people, and we'll both say I do love Brene Brown's work, and I think it's super important what she's saying. But again, I just think it's kind of, whenever I hear the phrase "be kind," and I always say this, be kind. Yeah, be kind, but be kind also to the people who aren't being kind, because they need help to get to that place of kindness. Because, we can throw around be kind and be more empathetic, but we really are forgetting what these words mean. And it doesn't mean be empathetic to people who are being empathetic to you, or be kind only to the people who are being kind to you. It's sort of like, how can we get to a place where we can really recognize that people being vulnerable is just right in front of us. And I 100% disagree with everything you're saying, Al, without discrediting the vulnerability, that is important about people getting to a place where they can talk about their personal stories. But I do feel I'm in a place of privilege now, that I don't have to yell to have my voice heard, because I'm hiding something really deep inside of me. So I find that to be a privilege.
Can we just sit with that for a second? Because that was really powerful.
Well,
we've lost him. Can we just sit with that? He disappears.
Julian, where are you?
He's gone.
Gotta go.
Where's he gone? Alan, I guess it's the two amigos now.
Yeah.
Third one.
Dos amigos.
Well, we got Agnes. Agnes, you're hired. You're the third amigo now. Julian's been dropped.
Dos amigos, una amiga.
Oh dear.
Does he have to let himself back in, or?
I don't know how that's going to work, but I'm sure he'll figure it out. So I feel like now that Julian's gone, we can kind of do anything we like on this podcast. Like we should just,
Well, I just don't know. I mean, I feel, I was just going to call you Brene. I feel Agnes, that, Julian just texted me. He said, "Did you get kicked out?" I better text him back. No, I think you did, buddy.
How on earth did he get kicked out
He put it out into the world to
of a podcast that maybe Brene Brown was watching? I don't know. Maybe she was watching.
I think Al and I should have gotten kicked out in that case.
Wow.
Well, but I think it's good to be able to challenge, and again, not challenge what Brene Brown is saying or anybody else in the self-help movement, but to try to put it in context and make sense of what she's really saying when she talks about the power of being vulnerable, and I think we need to own that she's speaking to people who watch TED Talks and who buy her books, and by and large, they are the privileged segment of society.
Mhm.
Julian's texting me a whole lot. He texted me, "I got kicked out." He says, "Keep going. Are you two still on?"
Tell him he's been fired from the Three Amigos.
I don't type fast enough. I just put yes. So
Brilliant.
So is it in the introduction, Agnes, you talked about, or I talked about what you had written, or what I got from Julian around addiction in your family, and was that when you were a child?
Yes, and all the way through. So I mean, alcohol was the main, the substance of choice, and so I mean, it was chaotic. There was lots of sleepless nights. We had lots of first responders coming to our home, and even thinking back, my siblings and I sometimes were just like, "Oh my gosh, like remember when this, remember when that." And the biggest thing I just remember, growing up thinking was kind of one of those things, especially when we had
He's back.
He's back.
He's back. Welcome to the Three Amigos.
The Three Amigos, you've been dropped, buddy.
Oh, I'm muted. There you go. I don't know what happened. I was having a moment there, and then all of a sudden, poof, I disappeared.
It was so funny because you said, "Let's just sit with that," and it went boom,
Boom.
and then you're off.
See you later. Julian went on another planet, had a little moment. Agnes blew his socks off. I mean, that's what happens when we have our first amazing female powerhouse on the Three Amigos podcast. Just
I couldn't agree more, mate.
sorry, guys. I don't know what you guys are talking about, so keep going. I feel like I interrupted real bad.
Well,
yeah. Go ahead, Al.
Well, I was just going to say I was just going to lead Julian down a dark and dangerous path. I don't think I will.
Do it, man. I'm in for it. I mean, I already went down to another universe and I came back into this stratosphere. I mean, this is...
Yeah, you were cyber traveling. Hey, no, Agnes was just telling us about her childhood experience with addiction. So if now continue, please.
Yeah. So I was saying, it was, I'm sure like a lot of people who have grown up can relate that it is very chaotic. You're in survival mode the whole time, and you're kind of going, from day to day, basically just that fear of the weekend or fear of holidays, you kind of living in that fear, but at the same time being really hopeful, thinking that things are going to change. At some point things change, and I think too, the thing, that even in the work that I do today, one of the biggest things I remember, and our first responders are incredible and they do such important and beautiful work. And so, when I started this movement, Starling's community, it was sort of, I always felt growing up that there was always an opportunity for whether first responders, health professionals, people we were in contact with, to really make an impact in the child's life that is in that home when they're coming. And of course, it's chaotic, and so oftentimes there's aggressive behavior, walking into an environment. But then they meet that aggressive behavior with aggressive behavior, and there's kids in that environment who are watching and who can be really impacted, because these are the people who are behaving in really ugly ways. There's a lot of love in that family and a lot of hopefulness that you want people to get better, and you want that support. So when you initially know there's first responders, people coming to help, you expect that help of, you're going to make it better, but you see how they react and respond, and it kind of brings on more shame, and you feel less understood and you feel less supported. So that was sort of, I don't know if I maybe went down a bit of a rabbit hole there, but it was sort of one of those things I think that really impacted me until, definitely until my adult years, where it was one of those things of, how can we really, again, go back to just, there's people are coming from a place of adversity, and just like my parents did, they didn't have good childhoods. And so it was one of those things where, we had the time, we got to see the good in them. So we see the humanity behind that, and and you hold on to that. And you go, okay, it can get better. But you just wish that other people could see that, because not every parent is able to provide that support for their kids.
Did you carry a sense of shame growing up with alcoholism in your family?
Definitely, 100%, all the way up until, I'll be honest, 5 years ago, probably, where it was one of those things where I didn't feel I could talk about it for sure. Yeah.
So did you make a conscious effort or a conscious decision to come out with the alcoholism and mental illness?
Yeah. And I mean, I'm still struggling with that, because my story is so deeply connected and interwoven with other stories, right? So it's there's part shame and there's part pride of, they are such beautiful people, that are hurting, that were hurting, that are hurting.
Your mom and dad.
Yeah. And that were never supported. And people associate addiction with just horrible behavior and horrible people, and they think people who choose those paths have made that conscientious choice. And you have kids, and you hear all the rhetoric that's around about how we really dehumanize a person who's struggling, without understanding what's going on behind addiction and what's going on behind the anger, the frustration. So there definitely was a lot of shame, and I say pride, but it is shame, because you're afraid of getting attacked, you're afraid of them getting attacked, or people judging you, or them. And so you find ways to mask that, right, with the way we look, the way we talk, the groups we get involved in, which was challenging, because I always felt so torn between two places. Yeah.
So when you decided to go public, so to speak, with the alcoholism and mental health issues in the family, that was your point of vulnerability.
Definitely. Yeah. I would say yes. However, to be honest, a few years prior to that, so I had this vision 10 years ago. I wanted to start this blog called Roller Coaster Diaries, and I would be anonymous, and it would be about the chaos that happens, of being of a child of addiction, who's around the chaos and what you see and what you feel. And, and I never did it. And then, when I got to the point of finally saying, I'm going to start this thing called Starling's Community. And again, kind of like Brene Brown, you sugarcoat it. And so you say, I want to grow a community that is for every child. Well, when we say that, we actually think of a child that's in this perfect box. We're going to support them, and we forget about all the other children that are struggling in homes. And so I've really had to, over the past year and a half, I've gotten a lot more comfortable with my language. So yes, that was the point of saying, I remember the first time, and I text, my sister, and I say, I'm going to share a little bit of this, and I still get heart palpitations. And I still think, what is someone going to think? Like, next time they chat with me, they're going to be like, oh, that's why she's like that. That's why she cried right away when we talked about that. So you still worry about it. That shame is still there. But I still think I'm in a place of privilege even then, because when I was struggling and I would start crying or I would seem really angry, I had, I was reminded of things I should be more grateful for. And, because our negativity, we're in a society where we're told your negativity is bringing down my negativity. So, just don't have room for that right now. And that's how I felt.
it's so difficult. I see it on a daily basis, and I think, like for me, just hearing all this now, and even as a health professional, and you guys can all probably relate to this, is that there's almost kind of like going back to what you said about, worried about what people are thinking. It's almost kind of like a judgment passed on you if you are experiencing some kind of, something going on in your life at the moment or in the past, or and it almost makes it harder for you to talk about, because then you're in a stale place where you want to talk freely about it, but you're almost holding back because in fear of being judged. And I think this is one of the main reasons why, one, we wanted to try and do this podcast and try and talk freely about, everything going on right now, how it's affecting everybody's mental health. But also, how do I say this? Not kind of be like the knights in shining armor or the Three Amigos in shining armor, but almost kind of make people aware. So, I mean, I know a lot of people that will pass judgment on people if they're showing signs of any mental health, addiction, trauma, anything, anxiety. I've got family members with mental health, and it's and rather than being supportive, it's almost judgment being passed on. And I see it with the adolescents that I work with. And as health professionals, we sometimes feel judged for helping too. I do. When I tell people what I do, it's the instant, oh, you do that. And it's
usually followed by, are you going to analyze me then? Is that
yes Julian, it really pisses me off, sorry, I'll say it, but why is that even I've been watching lots of documentaries on Netflix of all this time about Sigmund Freud and how all the psychology started and all that. And even now, in this day and age where we try and be non-judgmental, accept everybody, mental health still has a stigma attached to it.
Well, I think sometimes, John, mental health professionals are the worst for perpetuating the stigma. And I say that perhaps to the chagrin of anybody who's a mental health professional watching this program. And for those people who don't know, I have been a mental health professional for 28 years, and I see it every day in my working life. So lots of buzzwords around stigma and breaking down the barriers and that, but we're not very good at it yet. And I think we have a long ways to go. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there.
I like that key word, yet. There's a lot of hope in that word, I think. Mm-hmm. And I do believe, this is a music and mental health podcast, and we bring in Agnes, and thank you, Agnes, for your true vulnerability. I mean, this is, we talked about how there's maybe a mismatch with how this word's been used, and publicized as a some sort of fantasized aspect of our life. But I think just listening to the work that you're doing right now, not only through Starlings communities, but also through Cups and Everyday, I think back to working on the inpatient unit, on the adult psych units. Mm-hmm. I think I referred a few people to you at the drop-in center, and it just clicked right now. I've worked with you before, but I didn't know that you worked at the DI, and I'm like, I swear I chatted with her on the phone.
You know what? It would have been, oh man, 10 years ago, I think, when I was there. And then there was a lot of things that happened during that time. And then I volunteered there for a bunch. So maybe though it's a small world. So
because I started at the Rocky View about 10 years ago. So
I was at the Rocky View ICU. And so when I worked at the DI, I was doing both. I was doing part-time for both.
Yeah. Who knows? Anyways, but it doesn't matter. I think it takes a specific character to be able to walk into that space and have the level of compassion for the individuals who are coming in. And I really like how you're saying, you know, somebody getting angry, somebody who is truly, you know, having probably the worst day of their lives, and their behavior reflects one that most people would turn away and walk away and be like, just kids, just don't pay attention, you know, keep walking, keep moving, it's not safe. But that's their vulnerability, you know what I mean? And how does one person learn how to lean into those uncomfortable moments? Because that's discomfort for many people, for people who don't necessarily have that exposure where they've kind of, you know, they have that resiliency of moving through a life situation, or maybe even the exposure, because you're constantly exposed to like high level of you know, traumatized people living with trauma, people living with mental illness, people living with addictions. Like how does the average Joe and Jill, you know, start to exercise the muscle of empathy, exercise the muscle of you know, resiliency, or encouraging people who are in that vulnerability, but it's like it's uncomfortable to experience. Like how do we help people, or what are some tips and tricks for people like that?
You know, that's such a big question, and I definitely don't have the answer. I think for me, it really, you know, even that idea, you know, John touched on it, and Al too, just, you know, that idea of holding space for somebody in terms of, you know, I honestly, until I remember the first time my husband said to me, and I brought up something from my childhood, and I said, "Oh my gosh!" Like I thought about a reaction I had, you know, with him, and how he was so angry he just didn't understand. And I remember saying, you know, "Holy, like I had some pretty, you know, crazy reactions," and he's like, "You grew up in pretty crazy circumstances." And it was such a powerful moment. And I don't know, he didn't know it. We chatted about it after. And I said, you know, giving me that space to try to really understand it. I've been married to my husband for 10 years, and, you know, it's taken 10 years. So this isn't an overnight thing. And I think it's just realizing that the person in front of you who is coming with those big emotions, when we just say, if we can just say, you know, like, you're struggling, like you're really angry right now. Like, do you want to chat about this? And giving them that space instead of saying, you're not allowed here unless you're showing kindness. Like, I will only show you love if you show me love.
Right. It's conditional. So offering an unconditional place.
It is totally, that's the perfect word. And that's really hard to do. And like you said, it's really uncomfortable. But if we can, you know, and I think it is practice. We're not born empathetic. We really have to practice it. And it is a muscle we need to use. And even if we know, I cannot do this, I can't handle that, you know, we really have to practice saying, what is more going on? This isn't about me. This is about them. What is more going on? If we can even just, you know, put ourselves in a mind frame, we all know what it's like to be stressed. And there's a lot of people who are living every minute of every single day in that stressed out zone.
So for people coming from a more sheltered perspective, who don't necessarily have the level of exposure, and maybe even with kids, like I often wonder, you know, like, you know, my kids are pretty lucky. Like they're, you know, for the most part, they're in a good school. They're, you know, they see a little bit of poverty here and there, but not a lot. You know, their needs are met. You know, and quite privileged, and I'm really happy about that. Yay, pat on my back. But at the same time, pat on society. But how do we maybe, like, do you think exposure to it, and what would be like the role or the place for exposure, or maybe just because seeing is believing, perhaps it helps as a kid for me, like until I actually saw maybe somebody who actually had a significant physical disability, I didn't really appreciate how lucky I was to have my full capacity, right?
Totally.
Are there opportunities for families or kids or children to get that exposure, or maybe even to contribute to communities that you know, who live with that, in that vulnerability all the time, 24/7?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, for me, I always struggled because I remember, like I said, I was torn between these two places of where I came from. I wanted my kids to know, I would always say, I would just say it. We don't have any money for that. We don't have money, just so my kids could hear that every once in a while, knowing we always heard that. My kids don't have to hear that ever. And I do think, I do think exposure is a huge part of it, because I think we can read the books and we can tell our kids, it's kind of like, use your kind voice, and we tell them, be nicer. There's this like disconnect, right? And so it's one of those things where I think, I do think books are really great because kids ask lots of questions when you read with them. And so there are so many books that you can incorporate those questions. But I think just in our everyday, when we get comfortable within our communities, within our, the friends that we have, that's all they're really being exposed to, which is a beautiful thing because it creates that sense of community. But if we really want our kids to be able to show empathy to other groups, to other individuals, and really be able to do that, again, they have to practice that muscle of empathy, of trying to understand somebody. So, we often, if you walk by somebody who has a shopping cart and whatnot, you see, my kids look every time, it's something different, right? So that's an opportunity to create a conversation in a really, why might they? And I remember, my son one time, he said, well, why can't they just walk into a show home? He was 3, and he said, well, why can't they just walk into a show home? We had just went into a show home and purchased a house. So of course he would think that, why can't they just walk into a show home and just get a house? And so it was intentional. I remember at that moment we decided, we have to be intentional. We have to create the conversations. My kids would way rather, read Batman and read, My Little Pony books and whatnot. So it's how do we incorporate books that are going to create more dialogue around these topics, and really ask them, well, how would that feel for you?
That's funny you say you got to create those conversations. My my kids were joking, and they were making an impression of me, and this is how the impression went. They said, "Let me tell you something about life." and I'm like, I don't say that, guys. I don't say that. And they're like, no. Let me tell you something about life. This is here, and they would just say something ridiculous, and then like, not, I kid you not, like maybe a couple hours or the next day, I'm driving and I'm like, guys, let me tell you something about life. Sometimes you don't get everything that you want, and there's people out there who don't have food on their table. You should be grateful. And anyways, so
totally.
Maybe my delivery isn't perfect. But I'm working on it. Exposure and making those conversations.
Sorry, Julian, I was interrupting you there. I was just looking up at my clock, and I see that we're running low on time. And there's something I wanted to touch on, and it's a question for all three of you, John, because you work in adolescence as well, and Julian, you're a social worker. With the work that you've done, Agnes, with adverse childhood experiences and its effect on the developing brain, and hearing you talk about empathy, do you think that you can teach empathy? I know you can academically talk about what empathy is, but how much of a person's ability to be empathetic is hardwired versus and what might your knowledge of ACEs bring to this discussion?
I think growing a child who can be resilient means providing those emotionally supportive environments, and that's the exact same thing you need to grow somebody who can be empathetic. In the short version, everything that we need in terms of growing our kids with empathy really starts with acknowledging their feelings, supporting their feelings, the good ones, but especially the hard and ugly and disastrous, monstrous ones. And when we don't provide that space, empathy is one of those things. It's the prefrontal cortex. It's our thinking brain that allows us to be empathetic. And we can't get into that thinking brain. We are in fight or flight mode a lot more. And so for a child, we can say, why can't you just be nice? Why can't you just be nice? That's not how we raise somebody to be empathetic or resilient. And they are just so interwoven.
So do you think if somebody can learn vulnerability through the process of being vulnerable, and experiencing vulnerability without the without those barriers that you put, that brick wall that protects you. Do you think through vulnerability a person can become empathetic? They can experience empathy?
Oh, I don't know if anybody else has a good, I can only speak from my experience and truly my story. I had, and it was, there's 3 people who brought me to a place of saying, you have to use your voice. You're so passionate about this and you have so much you can bring. And, that was my husband, that was my little sister, and it was one of my best friends, Ashley, who kept encouraging this. And I don't want to cry, but I truly could not have gotten to that place of being vulnerable without that. And I think that's what it all goes back to. You just need somebody to believe in you, that can give you hope, that I understand you, I get you, and you have value and worth.
I'm just reading some of the comments here from people watching, and it was on my mind too, about talking about, when our kids get older, and, I think role modeling behavior and role modeling how you deem yourself to be in society is crucial, is important, because at the end of the day, your kids will mirror what you do. So if you can show you can be empathetic to others and provide an explanation and provide reasoning and understanding, it's tough. It is hard. Like we've all got kids. It's tough to do that, and you always get hit with 1,000, or in my case, 1,000,000 questions. But a lot of our people watching, they're talking about role modeling and they're talking about their own experiences, and I think that's really important. And I think so too in our professional work too. We try and do a lot of that, where we show people that we're also vulnerable. Sometimes I share stories about my own history with the patients and clients that I work with. And I think that's important. And when you meet them halfway, I think that's where the magic happens. And not just with your clients, but with people in your family, people in society. I think we need to do more of that, and telling people that it's okay to talk about things like this.
I have a little story about that, just quickly. So, lately at night, my son's been struggling a little bit with just negative self-talk, and Alan, John, and myself, we all talk about kind of how we have this inner dialogue sometimes, even especially when we relate it to music, when we're playing a rhythm and we're just kind of having that negative self-talk, and we're kind of having self-deprecating thoughts about how we're doing or how we're performing. But my son's been experiencing that, and luckily, and I feel really happy about this, that he feels safe enough to be able to share it with my wife and also with myself, saying, when you told me that it was bedtime and that I had to go to bed, I thought I was a bad boy. I thought I was a bad kid, and this has been going on for some time, and I've been talking to him about it. And John, you're saying role modeling, or even sharing from your own personal experiences. I said, I found out earlier on in my life that my brain will often tell me lies about myself. Mm-hmm. And it'll tell me a story about something that I think is real. And what helps me is to ask someone else, or to check it in, or to look at, the evidence for, the evidence against, I use simpler words, but, and he really got it. And he's been able to identify those thoughts. So I thought I was a bad boy, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. Are you a bad boy? He's like, no, I'm not. But my brain told me that I was a bad boy, and it was interesting. And so just having that opportunity to kind of share from our own personal perspective some of the things, and that's a really simple thing, but just, I think that's vulnerability. That's saying, hey, I can relate, because I've also had a similar experience where I felt, negative. I've had a negative perspective on myself, or I've felt hopeless. I felt scared. I felt anxious. I felt depressed. I felt, fearful of what's going to happen. And I think there's a lot of that happening right now. And I think the fallacy right now is that a lot of people are either totally consumed in that fear,
Mhm.
or they're putting on that mask and saying everything's fine, we're doing great, I got all this time doing all my meditation. But there's another side to it, and I think we need to allow ourselves to really show both sides of the hand. And yeah.
It's so funny because I was having the same conversation with my wife yesterday after getting home from work. My wife was laid off from work like many others over the recent times, and so she's been home with the kids, but she's also seen it as a positive thing. She's home with the kids, get to spend time with them, but she's also identified self-care as really important. So I think with everything going on, self-care for everybody, even if you're at home full time, you're working at home from full time, unemployed, self-care right now is crucial for everybody. And I think over the past few weeks, we've really encouraged people, the theme has been trying something new and take up a new hobby. Maybe this week people can practice, they can practice being vulnerable. They can practice role modeling behavior this week. They can hopefully people listening to this podcast will think, oh yeah, maybe I will feel more comfortable about talking about my own mental health issues. And maybe this week I can focus on myself. So, but self-care at the moment is super important. Speaking about myself, as you know, I've got the medals behind me. I'm a runner. I've done lots of running, and this week has been really busy, and I've taken my gym bag to work every single day, but I haven't done anything in 4 weeks. So I thought, screw it, I'm going to go for a run. I'm going to go for a run today. And I did. And I'm really sore today. My legs are in bits and I got blisters on my toes. But man, oh man, that 60 minutes did me the world of good. And I feel like $1 million. So it's amazing how I would encourage anybody who's feeling who's in isolation, if they're feeling, claustrophobic, just do something for yourself for 30, 45 minutes, even if it's reading a newspaper or, well, I sounded really old then, reading a newspaper. You read a newspaper on your phone now. Try and get away from the screen. Like, get off the screen, like put it down. Like you touched on it earlier on, Agnes. I try not to look at my screen. I try not to look at it. It's hard. It's because it's a go-to, right? It's really, really difficult. So,
John, in the Western world, and I'm sure it's similar in the Eastern world as well. But we define ourselves. We so often define ourselves, especially between the ages of 30 and 50, by what we do for employment, and we hide behind that wall of that definition, and it sometimes becomes a wall that prevents us from really discovering other aspects of the self. And it's especially today. I'll tell you a very quick story. Oh, probably 20 years ago. 20 years ago. Wow. Dolores Durkach, a very close friend of mine, her and I did a presentation in Northern Alberta to a group of healthcare professionals. Most of them were nurses. And we asked them, I don't know, maybe it was between 200 and 300 people. And we asked them, just put a general question out to the group. So what do you do? And we solicited responses from members of the audience, and everybody told us, well, I'm an ICU nurse, I'm an occupational therapist on a mental health unit. They all described what they did for employment. Nobody said, I'm a mother, I'm a father, I play basketball, I take care of kids. they define themselves. So what happens when you take that role away from them? You're laid off, you have all these people who aren't working, you get people who are stuck at home with their kids. So what do? Well, I color, I paint, I draw, I play music. And I think this is an opportunity in this, especially during this pandemic, if there was anything positive that we could take out of this isolation, is to rediscover through being vulnerable, through being introspective, learning to describe ourselves and who we are and what we do, not for employment, but by what gives us meaning, what brings joy.
It's so funny how we're all discovering different things that we never thought we would do 4 weeks ago.
Exactly.
It's
And
so
how do we
funny.
carry this? How do we carry this forward? How do we move beyond? How do we use this momentum in discovering new aspects of yourself, of ourselves, and maintain this
Absolutely. So Alan,
post-pandemic?
what brings you, what's the new discovery that brings you joy?
What's my new discovery? This morning I got up, I sewed 4 masks for some of my co-workers at the Rocky View. That took about 4 hours. I sew slowly. And yesterday I was in the garage working on a new didgeridoo. Last night I brought the chainsaw blade in and I sharpened it so that I could not do any damage to my body making the didgeridoo. So yeah,
There you go. So building things for other people and
doing things. Yeah.
Agnes, do you have anything new or something that brings you joy that you'd like to share with the community that's watching today?
I never got into coloring when the rage of, start coloring and the calm that it brings, but it's one of my favorite things to do with my kids because they love to color, and I doodled my entire childhood, on the back of exams and stuff. So I lots of doodling and coloring. I gotta say that was really, I love that, Alan. I think that was really beautiful. Thank you.
John, what brings you joy? What is there anything new that you've started that brings you joy?
Crosswords.
Really?
Yeah.
You really are an old man. Hey, you're
I know.
busting out the
I know.
newspaper. I wonder what the crosswords are this week, dear.
John, are you a risk taker?
Oh yeah.
So do you do
100%.
crossword puzzles in pen?
Well, that would be tough because it's on my phone. So right in on my phone. No, seriously. I find, yeah. It was last week, it was Lego. It was Lego last week. The week before it was doodling, drawing. My daughter likes to draw, and so we're doing that. And this week it's crosswords. I don't know why. I was brazening away, and I thought, oh wow, I haven't done a crossword in ages since I bought the newspaper last year. So yeah, I do it because I just to keep the brain, although like with being health professionals, we're working every day, the brain is always active, but I'm finding that I'm not activating the brain for me on my terms. So that's why I'm doing crosswords, and I'm they're very easy, but crosswords, I do sound really old.
Hang on.
I like it, man.
Hang on.
You know what? We didn't even pull any old jokes today towards you, Alan. I'm just saying.
No.
I felt like last week was all borderline abusive. So this week we're being really nice to you.
Yeah, I was very vulnerable last week.
Yeah, we all were. Yeah, go for it.
What brings
What about you? Yeah.
So just today, my kids followed me into the music room in this space that's a little bit destroyed right now, but they came in and they started playing on things and just exploring, and they were all 3 of them quite appropriately engaging in whatever was going on and asking questions, and I was teaching them and showing them different things. That really brings me joy, to share my passion with others. I think that's probably something that I've done in the history of circles of rhythm, if you will, is sharing my passion with others. And I got to share that with my kids today, and that was really quite special for me. So
You are very good at doing that, mate. I will say.
Thanks, man.
That's cool, man. Did they just come in and just were like, bah!
No, usually they're kind of crazy, but today they were like, there was a respect component to the music, and that to me means a lot, because for me, music has been my therapy and has been my piece that has pulled me out of my vulnerable season, and Agnes, I just want to thank you for sharing bits, I'm sure just the tip of the iceberg of your story, and maybe before we close, could you maybe tell us how we could learn more about maybe if there's families out there, or even grandparents who want to do things with their kids and find out a little bit about what you're doing? Because the way that we know each other is through the Starlings, and I really, really, really loved and love, that's a present word because it's still happening, the work that you're doing. So tell us a little bit how we can find out more about and get involved.
Yeah, so it really is sort of an online thing right now, but I do, once this is all over, so it's called Starlings Community, and it really is just that idea. There was a question about, how do we, is empathy, can we teach empathy? And it really is a way to just engage in those harder conversations that we often avoid. So it's Starling_community on Instagram, and something that Julian gets involved in, with you guys with Circles of Rhythm, is this event called Enkindle, and it really is creating that opportunity to allow kids to be kids, but to join them. We often drop off our kids. So Starling_community, I have, really deeper conversations, and I incorporate, how we can support kids. And I've been told that it's ambiguous. Am I, wanting to give opportunities for kids, or is it mental health? And the thing is, I think it's all of it together. We need to stop separating it. So
absolutely
bring that all together. So Starlings_community, and I would love to meet some new people.
Yeah, so send us information about that. And you also just briefly mentioned a list of books for children that you thought were helpful. So could you also send me those?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. Got lots.
And we'll put those in the comments so people can access those resources. Awesome. And final thoughts, Agnes, before we leave this, anything that you want to share?
I want to say thank you. And I just think, Julia, when I met you, and Alan and John, it's been so great to meet you. When I met you, Julian, for the first time, you just have such a heart for people and the goodness, and that whole idea of creating space for people. I think through Circles of Rhythm, when we brought our family, and it was an emotional experience because you welcome people in with such grace and such open arms, and you treat every single person, just watching how you guys are within Circles of Rhythm, you really want people to feel that there is a space for them, and you do it so well. And I just can't, just seriously,
Thanks.
Great. I love what you're doing. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I mean, you have to see what the Three Amigos can do all together. Yeah. I mean, anyways,
I would love to see some sort of empathy exercise built into a Friday night drum circle. Not empathy, sorry, vulnerability exercise.
With your clothes on.
Yeah.
And it's just his cowboy hat.
Right? Okay. What was that, John? What was that?
And with his cowboy hat, I was thinking clothes off, cowboy
his
hat
what?
on.
His what, John? His what?
I know what you're playing at. Cowboy.
Oh, cowboy. All right, everybody, say goodbye. Everybody rumble. See you later, everyone. Bye.